Anyway, we'll deal with some of the other questions that folks are dying to ask about other things. But first, security. Tafadhal. Yep, you're on.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right, so yes, I'm from the International Security Office here at BYU to do this security briefing and Title IX presentation that all of the students are required to hear before we do the program. So for those of you that don't know why BYU has an International Security Office, basically our job is to monitor all international events that are going on in the countries that we have students and faculty members. So we monitor political events, if there's a spike in crime, health concerns, anything that changes the security environment or the health environment where we have students or faculty members. We look at those things and we reach out to the students in those areas to make sure that everything's okay. So while you're in Jordan, we will be monitoring everything that's going on in Jordan to see if there's any issues, and we will be reaching out to you if necessary, or reaching out to your director. So that's why our office exists, and so part of our responsibility is to come and do this briefing. So has anyone been to Jordan before? One, two, two. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things in the presentation, so it's going to be a lot of information. So if you're a little bit overwhelmed with everything that we talk about, it's okay. I will be sending an email to your director, and he will forward it to you with all the information that we talk about, specifically the links to some of the websites that we discussed. So since the majority of you have not been to Jordan before, are you nervous to travel to Jordan? Are you excited? Or what are your concerns? What have you heard about Jordan? Anything that you want to make sure that we discuss in the briefing today? Okay, we'll talk about some specific security risks, but this briefing is not supposed to scare you. It's not supposed to make you nervous or paranoid to travel to Jordan or anywhere. A lot of the risks that we talk about are risks all over the world. It's not specifically tailored to Jordan. The risks that we'll talk about exist everywhere. It even exists here in the United States. Some of the risks that we talk about will be increased or heightened in Jordan, and we'll talk about those specifically. But we don't want you to be nervous or paranoid after hearing this briefing. The purpose of it is to inform you and help you feel prepared to travel. So any questions before we get started? Okay. If you're wondering where our office is, it's in the Kennedy Center. It's right next to the travel office in the southeastern corner of the building. So if you do have any questions, feel free to send us an email or stop by the office. In the email that I send you will have our contact information. Okay, so the first half of the briefing, we're going to go over a list of different websites. So really the thing that I want to emphasize, because we're not going to be able to go in depth over all the security or all the health risks or all the safety risks of traveling to Jordan. So I really want to stress to each of you and encourage you to do research on your own. Go from this briefing and in the next several months before you leave for this program, research and learn about and become an expert on the security environment of Jordan. And so some of the websites that we talked about will help you get started with that, but we really want to stress to you the importance of you being familiar and comfortable with the area that you're traveling to so that you're familiar with what you're going to be facing. So the first website we're going to talk about is TravelSmart. This website is our website in our office. So there's a lot of different things, a lot of different resources on the website that we won't talk about right here, but we recommend that you get on your own to look at it. But two things I want to recommend or emphasize. The first is the travel policy, the top left tab. So BYU does have a list of countries that are restricted for students to travel to that are outside of the program. So if anyone is doing any extra traveling, maybe before the program begins or after the program ends, if you're wanting to travel somewhere in the world as like a vacation type trip or something that is not part of the official program outside of Jordan, make sure that that country is not on the restricted list. And if it is, if you do want to travel to a country on the restricted list, it depends on the country, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't travel to that country. But come talk to us. There's a form you have to fill out and a process that you have to go through to get that country approved. So if any of you are planning on doing anything like that, if you have questions specifically, go to the travel policy tab or come talk to me afterwards and we can work all that out.
And let me just add to that, that there are some requests that are ridiculous requests that will be automatically turned down and will cost us political capital. So you should talk with me before you try out some of these.
Yeah, and on that note, let me just show you what the restrictions list looks like, because it can be a little bit confusing. So it's organized alphabetically, and so these are all the A countries. So you'll see that some countries have an asterisk next to them, some of them don't. The ones that do not have an asterisk means that you can still petition to go to that country. So even though it's on the restricted list, if you do want to go to that country for whatever reason, there is a form you fill out and a process to go through to get it approved. Sometimes it's approved, sometimes it's not. It's just depending on what you're doing there, how long you're going to be there, and what country it is. But for countries that do have a red asterisk, they're completely restricted, and so they are not even allowed to be an option. And so if you want to travel to a country with a red asterisk, it's probably better use of your time.
For those countries with asterisks.
I know this is tangential, but what's going so wrong in Algeria?
So there's different reasons why certain countries have red asterisks and some don't. We won't get to all of the logistics here. Some of it's health related, some of it's not necessarily crime. It could be just the region of the world that it's in. So there's lots of different factors that we can use to indicate. All right. Any questions on that before we move on? Okay. So the second thing on this website I want to point out is the travel registration, the second tab. So because our office is in charge of monitoring everything that goes on in the world where we have students, we obviously have to know where everyone is, where all students and faculty members are at a given time. So we use a system called ITMS to keep track of everybody. And so what your director will do is he will put your itinerary information for the program into the system so that we know like the address of where you're going to be living, where you're going to be on what days, and what you're going to be doing while you're there for the program. But for anyone that is doing individual travel before or after the program, that information will be needed to be added individually. So let me just briefly show you how to do that in case somebody falls into that category. So on the Travel Smart website, you will click on travel registration. It will bring you up to this page. And there's a training video here that walks you through step-by-step how to add all your itinerary information. And again, your director will do this for you for the program. So if you're only going to Jordan and then coming back home, you don't have to do this at all. But for those of you that might be doing individual travel, this will apply to you. So watch the training video, and then you will go into the ITMS system using that link, and you will log in. Seconds. And then it will bring you to a page that looks like this. So it'll be a little bit different for you, but you will see where it says this test right here. It'll have what your director will add. So you can click on that and then edit your version of the itinerary to add any information that you need. So I just have an example here. So in the middle where it says itinerary, we'll have everything that your director adds for the program. But let's say you're going to be doing some post-travel to Europe or something. There'll be an option to add itinerary items. And you have 4 different options: transportation, accommodation, activity, and excursion. So transportation would be like your flight plan. So if you book your flight through BYU Travel Office in the Kennedy Center, it'll automatically go into the system, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you book your own flight plan, then go ahead and add that to the transportation section. Accommodation would be like the address of the hotel or wherever you're going to be living. And then activity and excursion, you can use those kind of synonymously, but basically making sure that you have the city where you're going to be living or staying, and if you're going to be traveling to multiple different cities, all those cities and the dates that you're in those cities. So that is a watered down version of how to do this, but any questions initially with what this is and why you have to do it? Okay, let me just show you what it looks like on our end. So this is what we see in the International Security Office. So this is an outdated picture, so it's a little bit different currently, but we can see all the different countries where we have students and faculty members, and then how many we have. And then when I click on each of these countries, I see everyone's itinerary information. I have access to their emergency contact numbers, and I can know how to contact them where they are at any given time. So a couple stories to illustrate why this is so important. So recently, there were some faculty members who were going to a particular country to do some research for several, well, we didn't know how long, but for a while. And before they left, we asked them to put all their information into ITMS so that we would know where they were, how long they were going to be there, and what they were doing. But unfortunately, they didn't listen, they didn't do what they were supposed to, and they just left to go to this country without putting their information into the system. So they leave, and while they're in this country, there's a major earthquake that happens. And so when we learn about this earthquake, we get into the system, but we didn't have any information for them because they didn't have it. And so we didn't know if they were in the area where the destruction from the earthquake occurred. We didn't know how long they were going to be in this country. We didn't know when they were returning to the United States. So it took us a while to track them down and make sure that they were alive. And luckily they were, and we were able to work everything out. But it would have gone a lot smoother if we had their information. So when anything happens, or if anything happens, just recently there was an incident where we had a student doing an internship, and so we were able to go in and see the location of where her residence was, and see how close that was to the incident. It was relatively close, and so we were able to send out information, police reports, and information on what the police were recommending to do. So if we didn't have that information, we wouldn't have known that she was in danger. So again, if this might not apply to you if you're just going on the program and coming home. Your director will do all this for you. But please, if anyone is doing individual travel before or after the program, it's really important that we know where you are. Question?
So this doesn't include the excursion to Israel and to Jerusalem that are after Jordan, right?
Will you be adding that information? Okay, so yeah, since it is part of the program, your director will do that. Good question. Anything else before we move on to the next website? Okay. All right. So this website, travel.state.gov, is a really good website to begin your own research on the security environment of Jordan. So on this website that's created by this U.S. State Department, it has a page like this for every country, and so this is the one for Jordan. And I will send a link to this page in the email, so don't worry if you don't know how to find this. So what the State Department does is it ranks every country in the world on a ranking from 1 to 4. And this is a relatively new ranking system. They just implemented it a few months ago. So you have 1 being exercise normal precautions, all the way down to 4, do not travel to those countries. So there's only actually a relatively small number of countries that are number 4, like Syria, Afghanistan, and those types of countries. So you'll see that Jordan is a level 2, which means exercise increased caution. So we'll talk about why that is in just a little bit, about specific risks. But you can find a lot of detailed information on this website. One thing I do want to point out, if you scroll down, this tab right here is the safety and security tab. This information is going to be really, really important for you to be well familiar with. And so we highly recommend, when I send the email with this link, to go on and read this short page about specific risks, particularly crime, terrorist-related risks for Jordan specifically. And we'll talk about some specific things in just a second, but this is where you find the information on this webpage. So, read the safety and security tab. The next thing that BYU requires you to do is enroll in the STEP program. And this is also through the State Department. And so what the STEP program does, has anyone enrolled in STEP before when they've done international travel? So a few of you. So for those of you that haven't done it before, don't know what it is, what it does is it provides your emergency contact information to the U.S. Embassy of where you're traveling to. So what you'll do is you'll put you'll click on this blue square, and you'll go through a short enrollment process where you'll give your name, your email address, your phone number, your passport number, the dates that you're traveling, and the countries that you're traveling to. And then the State Department will send that information to the U.S. Embassy in Amman, and that way, while you're there for the duration of the program, the U.S. Embassy there will be aware that there's this BYU program in the country. And so if, for whatever reason, there was some kind of emergency situation and they needed to contact all U.S. citizens, they could. Is anyone not a U.S. citizen that's going through the program? If anyone is not a U.S. citizen, you can still enroll as a not U.S. citizen. It's just a little bit different in the enrollment process. So, like worst case scenario, and this has never happened for a BYU program, so don't worry, but like, let's say war broke out or there was some extreme terrorist attack and they had to evacuate all U.S. citizens. The U.S. Embassy would use the STEP program to be able to contact you and know where you are. So again, that's like never happened for a BYU program, so don't worry. But more likely through the STEP program, you can receive these types of security alerts through your email. And this is just an example of one. that was sent to U.S. citizens in Rome, and it's talking about some protests that were happening in Rome on a given day, and advising all U.S. citizens to stay out of that area. And this is very, very common. We see alerts like this from the State Department every day in our office. So it's likely that you'll receive this through your email while you're there. So it might be information about planned protests, it might be information about terrorist activity, it might be information about health, or maybe there's a spike in crime in a given area. We've even seen some as specific as stay out of, or don't go to this particular restaurant because there's a lot of crime in that neighborhood, things like that. So sometimes it's really, really detailed, specific information that's good to be aware of as you're in these countries. And so you will have access to all of that through enrolling in STEP. Any questions on how to enroll or anything? Okay. All right, the next website is the CDC website. This has information about international health. So if you have questions about health risks in Jordan, you can find all that information on the page. This is just an example of what it looks like for the Uganda page, but there's one for Jordan as well. There's nothing specific I want to go over right now, but if you have questions about that, that can be found on the CDC website. All right, your insurance. Has anyone talked to you about your insurance yet?
Listen up, please.
Okay.
I don't want to answer any of these questions.
Yeah, it's a little bit complicated, so hopefully I can answer all of your questions if you have some. So BYU contracts with GeoBlue to provide insurance for all study abroad students. So all of you will be automatically enrolled because you're part of this official BYU program. So there's no extra cost, there's no extra enrollment that you have to do. The cost of this insurance is included in the program cost of what you're already paying, so there's nothing extra you have to pay. It's extremely comprehensive and inclusive. It's up to $250,000 in medical expenses with no deductible 100% coverage. And that includes medical evacuation, natural disaster, and political unrest evacuation as well. So it's really comprehensive. So a couple things, just details. Make sure that you still have your primary domestic insurance here at BYU. So whatever is covered you here in Provo, whether that be your parents' insurance or BYU insurance, make sure that that continues. Don't cancel it. Make sure you pay for it to have it extended through the duration of your program, because that is one of the requirements in order to get this. Also, for whatever reason, if you were to have some kind of medical emergency and you had to come home early from the program, this won't cover you. This will only cover you in Jordan. And so you need to make sure you have primary domestic insurance.
And this has happened, so you don't want to mess with that.
It has happened, and we've had issues with students like canceling their insurance or something. So make sure you still have your domestic insurance. You will have this. For those of you that are doing individual travel after the program, you will not automatically be enrolled in that because obviously we don't know about it. So what you're automatically enrolled in is just the duration of the program. So if, let's say you're going to be spending a week in Europe after the program ends, come talk to us or go to the ISP office and talk to Angelique Powell, and she can extend the coverage dates for however long you need it until you come back to the United States. And then you'll have to pay the extra cost, of course, but it's only about $20 a week. So if you're going to be spending a week in Europe after the trip, you'll just pay another $20. So there's two different options on how to access resources through GeoBlue. One is a website, the GeoBlue website that I will send you, and they also have an app, a GeoBlue app that's free that we recommend you downloading before you leave. So we have some screenshots of what the app looks like. So let's say that you're in Jordan and you get sick, but it's not like an emergency situation but you want to set an appointment to go see a specialist or a doctor, maybe like the next day or maybe 2 days in advance. So you can get on the app or the website, it's the same thing. You can go to the provider finder and go to doctor hospital and search for a doctor that's in the area where you are. And there's doctor profiles, and so you can look to see what doctors GeoBlue has network providers with in Amman specifically. So that is a really good helpful resource. And then you can contact that doctor, set an appointment. You can even contact GeoBlue directly, and they can set an appointment for you if you don't want to deal with it, especially if there's like a language barrier, if the doctor doesn't speak English or something. So lots of different ways you can go about doing it. They have maps and things so that you can find their location. But let's say there's an emergency situation where you don't have time to get on the app or get on the website to find a local doctor or hospital. In that kind of an emergency situation, make sure you get the medical attention that you need. So go to the nearest hospital to get what you need medically. And then, once you're stabilized, you can contact GeoBlue and they will start working with that doctor or with that hospital to ensure payment since you will be covered 100%. Question?
In that case, would you call, I have 3 ideas, the local police, Dr. Belknap, or the embassy?
If like an emergency situation, it would depend on the type of situation.
Sure.
I mean, if you were like, if it was life-threatening, you need to get to the nearest hospital.
Okay.
And then contact Dr. Belknap as soon as you can after that. So it just kind of depends on the situation, but make sure you get the medical attention you need. If it's like life-threatening, go to the hospital. Yeah.
So are mental health needs covered under this as well, or is that something separate?
It does. So let's say if you need to see some type of therapist or receive professional attention, then that is covered.
I should say that we have recommended professionals from the embassy there has a list of recommended people that we go with.
Great. Yeah. So if it wasn't life-threatening emergency situation, of course, you need to talk to Dr. Belknap immediately, and he can help you find a doctor or know what hospitals to go to. One thing I will point out is that sometimes GeoBlue doesn't always work like it's supposed to, logistically. So, especially in emergency situations where you have to immediately receive medical attention, sometimes students are left with like a medical bill. So that could be something as simple as like a doctor's office fee that's like $20 or $25 US dollars. But sometimes it's been more substantial if it's more serious. So make sure that all of you have some method of payment, whether that be a credit card or something, in case this happens. Even though you are covered 100%, sometimes logistically GeoBlue can't work fast enough with that doctor's office or with that hospital to ensure payment, and so you're initially left with the bill. So make sure that you do have a method of payment, and then if that does happen, where you do have to use your own money to pay for something medically, keep itemized receipts for everything, and then you can send it into GeoBlue and get reimbursed 100%. And there's not a timeline for that, so you can wait until you come back to the US and deal with all that. Just make sure you keep receipts if you spend money.
I guess you had it on a couple slides ago, but apparently GeoBlue won't work unless you've done a physical and dental checkup before.
No, it just doesn't cover routine dental checks. So you don't have to, it's not a requirement to get those, in other words. But that is one thing that GeoBlue doesn't cover, is like if you want to just go get a cleaning or something in Jordan, it wouldn't cover it. So it's mixed. But if it was like an emergency where you're having like pain, or if you need like an emergency like root canal or something, that would be covered. There's just routine dental that's not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the app, you will also have access to your insurance card. So if you do go to a hospital or doctor's office and want to see proof that you are insured, this is where you can find it. So since you don't leave until the fall, it will be several more months. But eventually, once we can enroll you, you will receive an email with this insurance card in the email. And so right here, it will have your name, and then underneath your name there will be a number, and it's called your certificate number. And you'll use that number to create a username and password to log into the app or log into the website. So right now, if you try to go onto the app or go to the GeoBlue website, you wouldn't be able to access any of these resources because you're not enrolled yet. But once you are, which again, it will be a couple months before that happens, but eventually you will receive this email with that certificate number, and you'll just go in and register that certificate number, and then you can create a username and password, and then you can access all these resources. A couple other things with medicine. So for those of you that need to take prescription medication with you, the app or the website is a good resource to determine whether that particular medication is available in Jordan. So if you're curious of a particular medication, you can go onto the app and see if it's available or not. A couple of things with medication. Depending on what kind of medication it is, there are some countries in the world where it is illegal to take certain types of medication into the country. Particularly ones that have narcotics in it, or a lot of like ADHD medication like Adderall is illegal to take in a lot of countries in the world, or it's not available. So I don't know all the specifics with Jordan.
No Adderall. We searched high and low.
Great, perfect. And a lot of similar types.
It's not great, really. It's really a problem, but yeah.
Yeah. And we have, not Jordan, but we have had other students travel to countries with certain types of medication, and they've had trouble with local authorities because of it. So whatever types of medication you are taking, do research, look into that medication, and one, make sure that it's legal to take in that country, and then if you're questioning about the availability in that country, you can go on the app or the website. But Adderall is a big issue, other ADHD medications, anything that has narcotics or is classified as some type of medication has issues. So if you have specific questions, you can come talk to us, but we don't have all the resources available to us to check legality of all medications. We do have some information, so if you do have questions, come talk to us, but contacting the Jordan Embassy or just doing research online, you can find a lot of information. So let's say for other medications where it is legal to take that into the country, you still want to take some precautions. So one, keep it in the container that you receive it in. So don't take your medication and put it in other types of containers, or don't put it in plastic bags. Leave it in the prescription container that you received it in. Also keep or take with you a copy of your prescription from your doctor, and have that with you when you're traveling. And then when you are traveling to Jordan or to other countries, keep your medication in your carry-on luggage. Don't check it on into your check-on luggage. Keep it with you in your carry-on. Any questions with that?
And just let me say that to get a 4-month supply takes a while, so this is not something you want to push off until like mid-August. It really, you want to be on the ball with getting all your medications lined up that you might need to take.
Thank you. I think that's good for the app. Okay. Any questions so far with medications, insurance, anything we've talked about so far? Okay. So for the last half of the briefing, I want to talk about some specific risks. And again, like I said earlier, we use the same presentation for all of our briefings. We don't have specific presentations for each country. So these risks exist all over the world. And even though there are some risks that are increased in Jordan or in other parts of the world, we don't want to scare you or make you paranoid. This is good information for wherever you're traveling to, but we will talk specifically about some things particular to Jordan. So like I said at the beginning, it's really up to you to learn about the security environment of Jordan, be experts on it, and use the websites that we talked about at the beginning to start doing that research. And so by understanding and having a good grasp of what the security environment is in Jordan, then you can better implement strategies to avoid being targeted for certain security risks. So that might include just avoiding certain areas. It might include the way that you dress, the way that you act, particularly the way you act with the opposite gender, all these things. By understanding the local culture, the local security risks, you're able to better implement strategies to avoid that. So first thing I want to talk about is pickpocketing. So the U.S. State Department labels pickpocketing as the most frequently experienced incident that happens to foreigners in Jordan. And that's pretty common all over the world. That's usually the number one thing is pickpocketing, petty crime. Different techniques that pickpockets use to steal your stuff varies depending on what country you're in. So for example, like this picture, top right-hand corner is very common in Southeast Asia. It could happen anywhere though. A couple stories. Let's see. So we had a faculty member who experienced something similar to that top right-hand corner picture. She was crossing a street at a crosswalk and she had a bag over her shoulder. She was crossing the street and a guy came up behind her on a moped and tried to rip the bag off her shoulder and drive off. We've had students who have been in a restaurant and they've had their cell phone sitting on the table and maybe they got up to go to the bathroom or they just weren't paying attention. They were turned around talking to other students that were sitting next to them. Their cell phone was on the table and someone walked by, snatched their cell phone. Or we've had individuals when they use an ATM. They use an ATM and they withdraw cash, and as they're walking away, someone had been watching them and knew that they had just withdrawn cash and they've been approached, maybe threatened with a weapon or something, and they've gotten robbed. So all different types of ways that people steal your stuff, people distract you, or people target you. So what are ways to avoid this? So let's say I had my backpack with me and I was traveling around maybe in a tourist location or just around the city where there was lots of people, and I had this on my back. I would want to keep my valuables, my wallet, my electronic devices, in an inside pocket deep down where it's harder for people to access, not in one of these front pockets. So don't have anything that you don't want stolen in a front pocket like this. If this was on my back, it would be really easy for someone to come up behind me and unzip one of these front pockets and steal something. So make sure that your valuables, your cash, your wallets, your purses are secure when you're out in public. So as foreigners in another country, you're going to stand out. There's not much that you can do about that. But you can implement strategies to blend in as much as possible. And a lot of that has to do with the things that you have on your person, the way that you dress, and the way that you act. So if you don't need big bulky backpacks or big bulky purses with you when you're traveling around in public, don't have them with you. Don't travel with all of your electronic devices or all the cash or all the credit cards that you have. Limiting the amount of things that you have on your person when you're traveling around, and that will lessen the likelihood of you being targeted for pickpocketing. By the way that you dress, if you look like a Western tourist traveler that looks like they just came from the United States, you're going to stand out and look different from local people. And in this regard, the BYU's dress standards and honor code actually helps in this regard because the honor code, BYU students dress a lot more conservatively than the typical Westerner, and so that does help. So making sure that when you are around a lot of people in public, tourist areas, or just a lot larger cities where there's lots of people, implementing those strategies to make sure that you're keeping your stuff safe and yourself safe.
So I'll just say, we've had, in Cairo, we used to have a lot of pickpocketing. It's pretty rare in Jordan. My wife was the victim of a pretty elaborate scam in Deer Salt, our favorite city. But anyway, so it's relatively infrequent in Jordan, but you don't want to be the one who's like, oh man, I was the only person who was pickpocketed.
Thank you. Yeah, I failed to mention that the State Department does label Jordan as a low risk for crime, including pickpocketing. And so there's a lot of other countries in the world where we do have students going to that is a lot higher risk for pickpocketing. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. Along the same lines with transportation, I don't know generally what is your transportation situation?
Almost always taxis, but there's a few buses.
Okay. So let me focus on taxis then. We'll talk a little bit more about sexual harassment, sexual assault in just a second. But one thing that I really want to stress is that when you are using taxis, that females don't sit in the front passenger seat of the taxi. That's something that the U.S. State Department on their website really stresses for Jordan and other countries as well. But sexual harassment from the driver to female passengers, especially if they're sitting in the front seat, has been reported. So always sticking together, never traveling in a taxi by yourself, never being by yourself. But even if you are with other students as you're traveling in a taxi, make sure women don't sit in the front seat.
You can have a fourth woman can sit in the front, and that's legit. But the other three are like, have daggers ready, right? So, I mean, it's not like you would need to, but the guy understands that he's not alone with this woman in the front seat, right?
Yeah.
But a woman sitting in the front seat doesn't need to sit in the front seat, is signaling something that you don't want to signal.
Great. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But also with taxis, making sure it is an official taxi with clearly labeled licenses and a taxi company making sure that it's a legitimate taxi. And again, sticking together, making sure that you're traveling with other students. Okay, with ATMs, does anyone know what a skimming device is on an ATM? Or can you kind of briefly explain what?
Yeah, it's like something they'll put on the part where like you put your card, so that instead of swiping your card into the machine, you're actually swiping it into the reader, and that reader will take your info and they'll use it to get your phone.
Yeah, and there's different ways that they do this. This is a picture of one. So an ATM with the card slot right here, and this guy, this perpetrator, somehow got an exact replica of what the card slot looked like, and he put a skimming device on it, and then he glued it over the real slot. So that way, anyone that uses this ATM now, when they put their card in, it will skim their credit card number and send it to the perpetrator. There's different ways that people do this, and again, it depends on the country, on what tactics are more common. But there might be hidden cameras, there might be fake PIN pads or other things glued on the ATM or inserted into the ATM to steal your credit card information. And a lot of countries, especially developing countries, there'll be just people lurking around the ATM and try to like look over your shoulder as you type in your PIN number to see if they can still steal it. And then if they have one of these devices that steals your credit card number, they have your PIN number, they have your card number, and that's all they need, right? So different ways that they do this, and so sometimes it's virtually undetectable. So how do you avoid this happening to you? If you do have to use an ATM, make sure that you only use ones that have more security attached to it. So oftentimes that's like inside of a bank or attached to a bank, like right outside of the bank. It might have like a separate structure right outside of the bank for ATMs. Those are more safe. Ones inside of a hotel or in your residence or attached to your residence or inside of a building in general are often more safe. But avoiding the ones that are out on the street, in a public square, where it's really, really easily accessible to these perpetrators and they can just easily put these devices on them. So just think about what ATMs could be more safe than others and try to only use the ones that are inside of a bank or inside of a hotel.
ATMs is how we get our cash, so we do a lot of this, and to my knowledge, we've had no issues with ATMs.
Also, other strategies, don't use use an ATM alone. So have someone else with you that's kind of just like standing next to you and watching to make sure no one is looking over your shoulder. And also, after you use an ATM is sometimes the biggest threat. So let's say you do use an ATM and you're walking away. Someone has been watching that ATM and sees that this foreigner has just used an ATM to withdraw cash, and so they know that that you have cash on you. And so as you're walking away, they approach you and threaten you and rob you that way. And so again, by having other students with you, and if you're in larger groups, it's less likely for this to happen. Along with that and ATMs, talking to your bank or credit union, letting them know that you're traveling, so that they're not concerned when they start seeing transactions coming from another country. So make sure that you talk to them about that. So like I said, the State Department does rate Jordan as a low risk for crime and violent crime. But again, it doesn't mean that it can't happen and that it doesn't happen. There are reports coming from the U.S. Embassy from Jordan that there are some instances of this. So if you are in any situation where you are threatened with a weapon or with some type of physical violence, it's really important that you are cooperative. And I'll just illustrate a quick story, or tell a story to illustrate this point. So there was a student who was in another country doing a study abroad program, and she was a victim of a pickpocketing. And she was in an area where there's lots of people, a big crowded area. And so this guy had stolen her purse and was running through the crowd with her purse. And so her first instinct was to chase after her, get her purse back. And so that's what she does. So she's chasing this guy through this crowded group of people, yelling at him to give her her purse back. She chases him for a while, and eventually the guy turns a corner around a building into like an alleyway. So he goes around the corner, and she follows him around the corner. So she follows him, and the guy turns around and pulls a knife on her. And she was able to back away and get out of the situation, and the guy ran off. But you can imagine that it wouldn't have taken much for her to have gotten seriously harmed. So the principle here is, even though it might seem counterintuitive, if you are threatened in any way, if someone forces you to give them money or your electronic devices or your bag or something, to be as cooperative as possible, and that's really important. You don't fight back or resist, because the more that you do that, the more likely it is that you'll get hurt. So just keep that in mind in the unlikely event that something like this happens. And again, by traveling with other people and always sticking together with other students, this is less likely to happen. With an express kidnapping, that first bullet point, I kind of already explained it a little bit, but oftentimes this does happen around an ATM, and in Jordan it often happens around an ATM in the few instances that do happen that are reported. So you use an ATM to withdraw cash and you're walking away, and someone approaches you and forces you to give them your money, or they might take you back to the ATM and force you to withdraw more cash, and then they take all of your money. So So that's kind of a tactic that's very common all over the world, and it does exist in Jordan. So again, traveling with other people, making sure that you're staying together, watching out for each other, especially when you are using ATMs. This is a lot less likely to happen. All right, so this is the security briefing, but we also go over Title IX stuff. So BYU does require us to go over sexual harassment and sexual assault. So by traveling to Jordan, you are traveling into a different environment, not only a different security environment, but a different culture, and a different religious culture. And so because of that, you're going to be experiencing a lot of new things. And so one thing I really want to emphasize and not just brush over is the existence of sexual harassment and sexual assault in Jordan. The State Department does list sexual assault and sexual harassment as a concern for foreign travelers. So let's say that you are in a situation where you are experiencing sexual harassment or you are a victim of a sexual assault from a local person, or even if it's from another student in the program even. BYU really wants to emphasize that you have a lot of different resources available to you. So a couple things to know. Let's say that you are in a situation like this. If you talk to your director, or if you contact us or someone from BYU, we are required to report that to the Title IX office. But let's say that you're in a situation where you don't want to report something formally, you don't want your name attached to some incident. There are other ways to report things anonymously. And so I will send a list of different contact information of ways that you can do that on the BYU Title IX office, or a Title IX website, for example. There's ways to report incidences anonymously. If you need professional like counseling or professional like therapy, for example, there's ways to do that anonymously so that you don't have to report something formally. So a lot of different options, a lot of different resources available to you, and I will send you a list of those things. But on the culture side, how to keep yourself safe and to understand the cultural environment that you are going into. I think it's the fourth bullet point. So be aware that men may mistake the friendliness of American women for romantic interest. So this is not unique to Jordan. This is all over the world, or in several different regions of the world. But the way that you might interact with the opposite gender here in the United States can be perceived differently when you interact with men or people, individuals of the opposite gender in Jordan. So be aware of that, understand the culture that you're going to, and be sensitive of that difference in culture. And so going back to the taxi example, by a female sitting in the front passenger seat of a taxi and being overly friendly and starting up a conversation with them, that can be perceived by the man as romantic interest. And so be aware of that. Be aware of that difference in culture. Other things to do is be cautious about the way that you dress, not just women, but men as well. And dress conservatively as you're going into this different culture. And not only for sexual harassment and sexual assault issues, but going back to being targeted for pickpocketing. If you are wearing a lot of expensive jewelry, or if you are wearing a lot of expensive clothes, it looks like you are the rich foreigner and you have a lot to steal, and that will target you for pickpocketing. So what are your thoughts? Are there any concerns about sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, or sexual assault, or any questions that you have about this?
Heck yes. Go ahead. We've actually already talked about it some, but Sala, if you want to.
It's okay if you don't have any questions. But I do want to not just pass over this as just another slide on the PowerPoint. But going back to things that you can do before you leave, learning about the culture and learning about the environment that you're going into, and thinking about ways that you can mitigate these risks. Another important thing for women particularly is to think about how you will cope with an incident or something that may happen. So not something graphic like a sexual assault, but something more not as physical, I might say, like sexual harassment, even something like catcalling or whistling as you walk by, and then local men might react in that way. How are you going to react? What are you going to do? How are you going to cope with that? If you know that that's going to bother you, think about that, how you can deal with that. And a lot of that is communication, making sure that you have good communication strategies with each other, with your director. And if you are feeling uncomfortable or if something happens, even if it is something like catcall or whistling that makes you feel uncomfortable, make sure that you talk about that with other students, with your director, and you're not just keeping that to yourself. Anything you want to talk about, discuss? Oh, here is a list of some of those resources that I was mentioning. So just as an example, that BYU Victims Advocates, those are professionals that you can talk to, report an incident, but it is anonymous, so it won't be officially reported with your name to the Title IX office. So going back to just that principle of having lots of different resources available to you if you're in this situation. Social media, let me go to the next slide here. When you're using social media while you're in Jordan, just be careful with what you're doing on social media, not just on social media, but on the internet in general. So for example, with social media particularly, not having really detailed information about your location or where you're going that day, or even contact information. We've had, not for this program, but other BYU study abroad programs, we've had individuals that have gotten their information hacked, and so perpetrators have been able to access students' phone numbers and email addresses and information about their parents. So just be careful with what you're doing on the internet, especially if you're using free or public Wi-Fi when you're in this country. So any Wi-Fi that doesn't require a secure password is public and free, right? So anyone else that's using that Wi-Fi can easily hack into your computer or phone and steal passwords that are saved onto your computer or social media information. If you're doing online banking or if you're even doing online shopping while you're on that Wi-Fi, they can steal credit card information. So just be really careful with how you're using the internet, what you're doing on the internet, and social media particularly, making sure that there's no personal information that's readily available. So our office does hear about all the bad things that happen to students when they're traveling abroad because we're the security office, so we're usually the first ones that get contacted. So because we know about everything, we know what is more prevalent and what students more often experience. So the number one thing that we hear about is pickpocketing, like I said. But probably a close second, if not even maybe a little more, we hear about mental health concerns. So a student traveling to another country where they've never been before and they're overwhelmed by the environment, the culture, the language, the situation that they find themselves in. And maybe they didn't have mental health issues here in the United States, or maybe it wasn't as a concern, but because of all the different triggers in traveling to a new country, they start experiencing significant issues. So understand your own body, your own mental health state, and think about how you can make sure that you're doing what you need to keep yourself healthy. And a lot of that can be mitigated by doing those really everyday things that we do here in the United States. So sleeping and eating enough. And you'd think that that's obvious. But we've had students who have had problems with this, and as they travel to a new country, for whatever reason, they're not sleeping enough, they're not eating enough, and doing those necessary things. And this also goes back to the sexual harassment thing, even if it's something as minor as catcalls or whistling or some kind of sexual harassment, that can affect your mental health state. So understand your personal situation and what might trigger that and how you're going to cope with that and deal with that. Civil unrest and protests. Jordan has protests, just like most other countries. And sometimes they're peaceful, but it doesn't take a lot for protests to become violent. And so if you are in an area where a demonstration occurs or takes place, just get out of the area. And by enrolling in the STEP program, like we talked about at the beginning, you're going to be receiving that information through your email about protests and things that are going on in the city where you're living. With terrorism, I don't have to tell you about the terrorism risk that exists in Jordan. But I don't want you to be nervous or paranoid or overly concerned about this. It does exist, but there's also a terrorist risk in Europe. We have tons of different programs coming to Europe. But be aware. So when you're traveling to tourist locations where there's lots of Westerners maybe, or lots of foreigners, or you're in other parts of the city where there's lots of foreigners or just lots of people in general, keeping your eyes open. If you see something out of the ordinary or something that doesn't seem right, contacting the local officials. But again, through the STEP program, you will receive updated information about potential terrorist activity, or if the police know of a particular area of the city where there's been a lot of terrorist threats. They're going to be sending that information to you through email, so you're going to be up to date on it. But any questions about this? And through the research that you're going to be doing individually about the security environment in Jordan, you're going to find a lot of information about particular areas of Jordan where they obviously are more of a risk than others, and a lot of those areas you're not traveling to. So, yeah.
I have a slight question. I don't know if you know the answer, but Dr. Belknap right now is how safe is like housing? Is there like any possibility of being like robbed while you're away? If like things are-
All things are possible, just like here, right? I mean, people can break into, you know, we had some interns, for example, some years ago. They were not in the houses we have guards outside. Almost all of the housing have guards. I don't mean like armed guards. I mean, they have doormen. And there's somebody who is watching over the place. We have never had one of the Hosset apartments broken into. We've had people leave their doors open and somebody walk in and take something. You know, somebody else from somewhere else in the building, that sort of thing. But we've never had we really have been very, very, very fortunate. And Jordan's just a pretty mellow place. Boring, some people would call it.
Thank you. I will say that I haven't read reports of this not being a very major issue. We're in some other parts of the world where we do have programs that is more of an issue.
One couple did have a carpet stolen from off of their steps. So their front. Yeah.
And that brings up a good point. I have read some things where the individual hasn't done what they're supposed to keep their own stuff safe, and sometimes that's not necessarily in your residence, but out in public. Like I said, like leaving a cell phone unattended on your table when you go to the bathroom, or leaving a bag, you know, on the ground when you're standing somewhere doing something when you're out in public. So those types of things are more likely to happen than inside your residence.
We've had a surprising number of wallets returned that were left in taxis and buses. Shocking number of. You should never expect to get a wallet returned, right? And somebody shows up that, hey, this guy left this in my taxi or whatever. So don't try it. And I should also mention that iPhones are really expensive to replace in Jordan. So if you have an iPhone, you should make get into really good habits about taking care of it. And I'm not talking about people swiping it. I'm talking about you just leaving it, somewhere, losing it. And not easy to replace at a decent price.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Are you on?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This might not be the right time to ask this question. If it's not, just let me know. But speaking of like cell phones and stuff, do we have like recommendations for?
We will be talking about this,
Okay.
here shortly.
Cool.
Any other questions? Okay. Photography sensitivities. I don't know anything specific with Jordan, your director might, but sometimes, and in a lot of countries, there's certain areas or certain things where you're not allowed to take pictures of. Maybe there's a law about that, or there's custom. In a lot of countries, for example, you're not allowed to take pictures of government buildings or military personnel, and sometimes there's religious sites that you're not allowed to take pictures of. Most of the times there's signs if it's a big issue, especially in tourist locations. But just be aware that sometimes in some countries there's photography sensitivities. And not in Jordan, but in other programs, we've had students and faculty members get arrested, for example, for taking pictures of things they weren't supposed to. So just to be aware of that.
We did have one student who was pushing the limits on that and got arrested, so.
Oh. Well,
He was really pushing it. I mean, this is, yeah.
so just be aware of that.
Circuit, right.
Religious sensitivities. So as BYU students, a lot of people in other countries see you as representatives of the church. And so because of that, it's really important that you are sensitive to the religious culture of the area you're traveling to. And I can't overemphasize that with a place like Jordan that is a majority Muslim country. In Jordan, it is illegal to proselytize. So just be careful with how, if someone does ask you about your religion, for example, just be cautious of how you handle that. Just last year, I read a report from the State Department that there were 15 foreigners who had to be deported from Jordan because they were in some kind of dangerous situation. And one of the factors that contributed to that dangerous situation was that they had been talking about their religion, and so there was religious differences with the people they were involved with, that were the local people, and so that contributed to this dangerous situation where they eventually had to be deported. So just an interesting statistic there. But just be cautious with this. Don't force your religion on other people. Don't proselytize. And even as BYU students, to just be respectful and aware of the religious culture of the people that you're going to be interacting with.
We had two students who went to the Dome of the Rock. I mean, we were going to the Haram al-Sharif, and one had an Arabic Book of Mormon in his backpack. She ended up having to leave at the shack, the place where you have to leave anyway. And then I ended up staying there for about a week. We couldn't retrieve it for, anyway, it was just, another guy that had his full set of standard works, I think, are still in Jerusalem. So, anyway, I did retrieve them, but they're in the Jerusalem Center. I don't believe they've got them back. But anyway,
Thank you.
yeah, not good.
Yeah, so don't take Arabic Book of Mormons out in public and try to pass them out or anything. Not for Jordan, but for a student who was in China, as another example, she took some Chinese Book of Mormons and was trying to pass them out. And, not a good situation, so just be careful about that. Just the last slide here before we wrap up, we talked about this already, but resident security. This program is great, and it's well planned out, well developed. The place that you're going to be staying at is a safe place. But like Dr. Belknap said, make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to keep it safe. So making sure that the doors are locked, windows are locked. Don't, even inside the residence, even though there's not a high probability that something will get stolen inside your residence, but still, don't have valuables laying around where it's easily visible or easily accessible. So just taking those precautions and making sure you're doing what you need to keep your residence or your living safe. And that is the end of this presentation. Do you have any questions before we wrap up? So I will send an email with all this information, but just really quick to recap all the things that we asked you to do from the international. Oh, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you know off the top of your head, but what kind of ID do we need to be carrying around with us? A passport or just like a driver's license? In Russia, you have to carry on a passport everywhere.
As far as Jordanian law, I'm not sure.
You don't have, you should not carry your passport. That's inviting trouble. Just losing it. I'm not talking about theft. I'm just talking, don't lose your passport, please. And so, but you should, it's a really good idea to carry a paper copy of your passport with you.
Yeah, so, copy of passport. We also recommend that you leave a copy of your passport here in the United States, just for multiple reasons. If you have copies of it, multiple copies, and if you lose your passport, it's easier to get it renewed that way, so just as a precaution. Question.
So the second to last bullet point, do we really have a lot of flexibility as far as where our apartment is situated, or do we just
It won't be higher than the third floor.
Okay.
So, but no.
Was there another hand? Yeah.
It was just a note. I mean, we'll be in there for a while, in Jordan for a while, but having at least, I have my copy of my passport as well as my travel plans. And so if you get questions like why you're there, or something happens, you have your address. I don't know, it can be useful. It could be also, I guess, bad to have as well.
Yeah, with like your actual passport or detailed information about your itinerary, I would definitely not have that with you when you're traveling around in public when there's lots of people, but having that like in your residence or just having a copy of it, even if you leave that copy at home or send a list of your itinerary like to your family or something is also a good idea so they kind of are aware of where you are. Thanks. Okay, so just to recap all the things that we asked you to do. Become an expert on the security environment of Jordan by using some of the websites that we send you. Enroll in STEP. If you're doing any individual travel, put that information into ITMS. And then in a few months from now, I would say about a month before your program leaves, start expecting that email from our office with your GeoBlue insurance card, and then create a username and password with that certificate number so you can access the resources on the app and the website. So that will all be in the email, but just to recap before we finish up. So any questions? Was that a
Then you just recommend getting a physical or dental before we go, just to be on the safe side?
It's not required for enrollment, but sure, especially dental, if you're just wanting to make sure you don't have, or don't, will need a routine check while you're there. Good question. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.